Give him some credit for thinking about it still.
Nearly 2/3 pot.
Your eyes do not deceive you. One player has 5 high, the other player has a straight, and the guy with the straight's the one who's tanking. This is real, this is happening, and it's from the EPT.
How can this be interesting? It's 5 high against a straight.
And yet, it's pretty interesting.
It's actually quite interesting, and that is why Brian with a Y, the ultimate suggester, suggested it, along with Breck Shutton. Congratulations, Breck. You suggested the same hand as Brian with a Y. You win.
Yes, and of course, if you want to suggest a hand for the breakdown, you got to tweet it at us. There's our Twitter handle right there. Of course, include a YouTube link and a timestamp for that YouTube link. That's how we do it up here.
And if you want to play with the poker guys, there's a way to do that too. That's on Nitrogen Sports Poker Room. If you use the link in the description of this video, you can play on Nitrogen with us. And we have this tournament that happens every month, and I can't believe it's real, Jonathan.
It's real, Grant.
I can't believe it's real. It's a 100 millibit guarantee with a 0.1 millibit buy-in. So the guarantee is 1,000 times the buy-in. That means we need 1,000 players to reach the guarantee. The most we've ever had is 65. That's not a joke.
That's real.
You could be the worst player in the world. You could be a cat playing poker with your tail, and it's profitable to enter this tournament. This is just not just sponsor talk. That's for real. Like, how could you not enter this tournament? You got to use the link, though.
Yep. This is, of course, a Bitcoin-only poker room, which is awesome because it means lightning-fast withdrawals and deposits. You got to get in there and get you some poker.
Now we got to get to the hand.
Bloody typical. Henry, we will continue providing you with the details you need right up until the close of registration, the start of that free roll. Panic ye not. There's plenty of space available. 5,500 players registered so far. Jaffe is open to 3,000. Carson with 5-4 in the big.
And sometimes I think I'd like a 3-bet with 5-4 offsuit against that open sizing versus peeling.
Oh, hello.
Anytime I have somewhere around, you know, 45 to 50 big blind stack, which Carson has a little bit more than that, I usually 3-bet pretty polar, so meaning I 3-bet my value or I 3-bet as bluffs, and then all of my middling hands, you know, my Broadway suiteds and things like that I'm calling. Just because it's not a disaster to 3-bet fold a hand like 5-4 offsuit, but it is hard sometimes to continue profitably out of position with a hand like 5-4 offsuit against a good and aggressive player such as Jonathan Jaffe. Probably would have 3-bet a little bit bigger though. I think almost 4x out of position is a better sizing, but
So King 10-10 trips for Jaffe. Carson already drawing dead.
I think this is the exact kind of flop that I would have to give up on if I were Carson, because you imagine so many hands in Jaffe's peeling range are Broadway suited hands. And let's say Carson actually had a value hand. Like, let's give him the top of his range, aces here. He's going to check that kind of flop. So it doesn't make sense to continuation here, even with a value range.
Check, check, and an ace on the turn.
Now that changes things a little bit, because when Jaffe checks back, There's a chance that Carson might delay c-bet with this particular turn card, hoping that Jaffe peeled with a hand like 9s or 8s or 7s, because those are definitely hands in Jaffe's calling range that he would have to fold to a bet here.
So a delayed c-bet from Carson, 7,400 into 25K.
Jaffe's obviously going to call here. I mean, the only value hands that really beat him that are in Carson's 3-betting range are aces or kings, because he can't really think that Carson's going to 3-bet a hand like king 10. He would probably just call that.
Kai says, this is when I say to myself, I'm going to represent 10s and go broke, lol. Not the best run out in the world for Jaffe.
Does make a straight on the end, but the backdoor flush comes in. Although Jaffe does block that, he does have a 10 of clubs in his hand.
Details of how to find the free roll on the screen right now. The password is Adonis, A-D-O-N-I-S. Adonis will get you registered for today's $2,000 free roll.
And if Carson's willing to barrel this river, he has to know that he's only representing boats. Most hands aren't going to bet the river. You know, even if he did somehow show up with trips in this spot, he would just check. Give him some credit for thinking about it still.
Nearly 2/3 pot, nearly 3/4 pot rather, 28K.
It would be quite the hero fold for Jaffe to fold a straight here, and that means he's giving Carson a lot of credit for having boats. Wow. And he believes.
Jonathan Jaffe folds the best hand.
Well, that worked really well for Carson, didn't it? Now, you got Jonathan Jaffe, who is an extremely good player, to fold a very good hand here. Now, it's not as good as you might think, and we're going to get to that a bit later. But this hand just went kind of nuts from the beginning with the 3-bet preflop to 11-5 with 4-5 off. I guess Jaffe's just been raising the button constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is Carson just trying to draw a line in the sand. I'm not sure why we'd pick this hand to do it. You usually want something with a little more equity when you do get called. By the way, Jonathan Jaffe's going to call a huge amount when he's in position, and you guys are as deep as you are. So I don't know if this is actually a profitable play with 4-5 off, but I guess Carson just can't take it anymore.
I guess not. So we don't love that, but let's talk about something we do love, which is Carson checking on the flop. Now, it might seem like we have 5 high, don't we have to bet and take a shot? And we're not saying this because Jaffe has a 10. We're saying it because of the range advantage that Jaffe clearly has on this board. Now, Carson shouldn't traditionally have really any 10s in his range here, right?
I mean, it depends. If Jaffe's been opening enough and is going to call a lot, Carson can have like some ace-10s and things like that. He can depolarize his 3-betting range a little bit.
He could do that, but let's assume for a second we're in a normal land. And,
okay.
And Jaffe has a bunch of 10s. He has like 7-10 suited. You know, he has 9-10 offsuit. Obviously, he has Queen-10 offsuit here. He has way more 10s. Beyond that, Jaffe has way more kings in his traditional range here because Carson traditionally wouldn't even have King-Queen. He would only have Ace-King as his kings in his hand. Jaffe has down to probably King-8 suited, King-Jack offsuit for sure.
I mean, Jaffe may have all the suited kings for all we know because they're deep enough and he's in position. And I got to believe he thinks he can outplay this kid post-flop. So he just may be sticky as heck when he's 3-bet in position like this.
Right. So ultimately, we really like Carson's check because of that, right?
Yeah.
He does a really good job based on the range advantage Jaffe has. Now, Jaffe doesn't want to chase away Carson, obviously, which is why he checks back. But due to the range advantage situation, Jaffe's kind of supposed to bet this board, right?
I think he is. It's an interesting spot in that he's so strong. Maybe he bets some of his kings here and doesn't bet all of his tens. But he certainly has to bet this a fair amount of the time when he flops this well. Because, as Grant's saying, he would bet this most of the time when he has the miss.
Now, we're going to refer to this range advantage later, so we should take note. If we believe Carson is really checking because of this, and we think he is because he has 5 high, you're supposed to bet the worst hands if you don't really take into account the range advantage.
Sure.
That means he also has pocket aces and pocket kings in his range because he's checking this board 100% of the time due to the range advantage.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind as we go. So we get to the turn, and now a card comes in that should affect things quite significantly with the ace of clubs here, right?
I mean, in theory, it feels like that slams somebody, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't,
right.
But it really feels like it does.
And Carson bets tiny now, and I like that a lot because Jaffe has a lot of hands that are better than 5 high. Pretty much all of his range is better than 5 high. If he has 8-9 suited here, he's got to fold on this ace. So when Carson bets tiny, he's achieving his goals pretty much similarly to if he bet bigger, right?
I think so. I mean, Jaffe can also have some pocket pairs that he decides to check back on this flop. And now the ace comes, and he just feels like he has to give up right away.
Right, so I think so far Carson's playing this immaculately post-flop, right?
I mean, I imagine Carson's betting the turn almost no matter what when it goes check-check on the flop, but the ace feels like just a dream card to continue on.
Right, so, okay, that happens, and Jaffe just calls, which makes a bunch of sense. You don't want to chase away an ace if Carson has ace-queen or something here, right?
Yeah, like a raise is pretty scary.
Yeah, it is quite scary, and it makes sense just to call. And now to Carson, it must look like Jaffe has something like ace-7 suited or something like that, right?
Yes, like, oh man, I checked my way into oblivion here. Oh well.
But it turns out that the flop oblivioned him already.
Yeah.
And now we get to the river, and oblivion is avoided with this bet somehow. Now Carson makes this 28K bet, and Jaffe ultimately folds. Now you might be thinking, he improved, he has a straight. How can he fold?
Yeah.
There are reasons to fold here. And reason one is we're not as high in our distribution as you think.
Right, it looks like we have a really good hand, and if you look at all the hands we get here with to the river, this is one of the very best hands, but actually, is it really one of the best hands, right? As Jaffe, we're often gonna bet our misses on the flop, so we usually have something, right? And also, obviously, we called the turn, so we have something also. But like, if we really look at the hands that we can show up with here, yes, we can show up with some just naked aces, like Grant's saying, like the ace-7 of X, maybe some kings also, though we might just bet a lot of our kings on the flop ourselves as Jaffe. But the club comes in, so now there's 3 clubs, and it really looks like, if I don't know anything at all, I'm sitting there as Jonathan Jaffe, it looks like I'm up against aces full a lot here.
Aces full or kings full to check the flop. Maybe a flush sometimes.
How can he bet that river? It's so scary.
It's super scary. Now Jaffe has, and speaking of Jaffe's distribution, Jaffe has a bunch of flushes in his range as well because he called the turn. Now he's on the river. He could easily have a flush. He also has full houses in his range. He could have ace-10, he could have king-10, he could have jack-10, right?
No question.
So all of those hands are in his range. So this straight isn't actually that high up in his distribution. However, it's probably a better hand than Carson believes Jaffe has.
I mean, I gotta believe Carson is targeting a weak ace here. Like a medium to weak ace is like, just go away. How can you call here? Go away. Like I happen to have a queen in my hand, go away.
I kind of think this is one of the closest spots we've ever talked about. I could go either way. What I need is more data on Carson.
Yeah.
Now, if he's the type of guy who's 3-betting 4 or 5 out of the big blind all the time, not just because Jaffe's opening all the time, that's the type of guy we got to call against. But if he's really a thinking player, which it seems like based on his flop check and his turn sizing, maybe as Jaffe, we have to just kind of flip a coin in our head and make a decision based on that.
I mean, it's weird because I would guess that this hand is somewhere right in the middle of our distribution, give or take. It's really close. The price we're getting from the pot would say we're supposed to call. If this is a cash game, I think we shrug our shoulders and call and lose a lot.
Yeah.
But it's okay because the price we're getting. But the tournament situation changes it, right? Because of course these chips are more valuable. We can't just add more. So we have to treat them with a little more sacredness.
Respect.
You know?
Respect the chips.
A shrine, if you will, we're going to make to these chips. So we have to be a little more careful with them. And so it makes it a really close, tough spot. And I agree, it all comes down to what do we think about this player?
Well, I guess Jaffe thinks Carson is a solid player who has good plans throughout the hand and is going to have a balanced range here and decides it's not worth these chips. I can find a better spot. I'm going to fold. And I can't fault him for that. It's a really tough spot.
It's a really tough spot. But boy, the first time I saw it, I thought, what are you doing, Jonathan? Wow, what a wacky river spot. I'm surprised that we ultimately came to, both in our podcast and here, that we think this is a fine fold. I wouldn't have guessed that we were going to come up with that.
No, I wouldn't have guessed that either, but really, it's a really cool hand. It seems a little bit more normal than you would think, but when we dove into it, we really liked it.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? Is this a good fold?
Yeah, you got to let us know in the comments. Do you like this play by him? Do you like this play by Carson to go for it the way he did? Really interesting line to check the flop with 5 high, presumably giving up, and then turning it into a huge bluff in a really big spot.
Yeah, it's super cool. And if you want to see another super cool hand, we got a super cool EPT bubble hand with Calvin Anderson and David Van Plu, luminaries, as Jonathan might call them.
I would call them that.
If you want to check that out, click right up here.
It's a great hand. You have to check it out. Really fun. Also, if you want to know how we came to all these decisions, we really had to dive deep into this one to get to, we think it's okay that Jaffe folds ultimately. You got to check out our podcast, The Breakdown, presented by the Poker Guys. It's where we spend a good 45 minutes talking about this one hand, all the decisions, what we think about it, and a lot of jokes thrown in there for good measure.